Order. Question number 3. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr Speaker, this question is to the Minister for Senior Citizens and asked, when can my office expect a response to the letter sent to her on 27 May 2015 regarding SuperGold Card concessions?
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member's office was made aware on the 27th of May after your email to the office, Minister Foss will respond in due course because the transport concessions around SuperGold Card fall under his delegation and not mine.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question.
Can the
Right
Senior
Honourable Winston
Citizens
Peters.
Minister please explain to the House and to the fool over here and the New Zealand Herald and seniors...
Order. Now that is the sort of remark that will lead to disorder in this House. Order! If the member wants the opportunity to complete his line of supplementary questions, I advise him to cooperate. Would he simply ask his supplementary questions?
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question.
Can the Senior Citizens Minister please explain to the House, the New Zealand Herald and seniors what arguments she has made against the government's continual delays in the SuperGold Card review and the lifting of the moratorium on new transport allocations?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As that member may or may not be aware, there was a review that began in 2013. That will be released in due course. It's not very far away now. That member asked me to make it apparent to the readers of the Herald. I wonder if Peter's yet to act on promises made to Northland is not the prompt.
Order. 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 This is a point of order.
Mr. Speaker,
and it will be heard in silence.
My point of order is about what arguments she has made to stop the delay in the review. Now, that's precise.
Order. Well, I wish the supplementary question had been precise that. If the Minister would please address that, because I had trouble listening to the answer. If the Minister could please address that question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There has been no delay. The review has been going on since 2013 and will continue until it's finished. And it is appropriate to give good time and attention and care to detail, something that member could well learn from.
Order. Order. Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If, as she has been described by her colleague, the Honourable Craig Foss, very robust in representing seniors, as he advised me on the 18th of February this year, then why is she saying that there's not been a delay when it was planned to announce that review completed June 2014?
The Honourable Maggie Barry.
That member is entirely incorrect about the dates, so the premise that there is a delay is totally flawed. As the Minister for Senior Citizens, I'm very proud indeed of the progress that this government has made with SuperGold Card. From very, very humble beginnings in 2008, there are now more than 12,000 businesses that the card is able to be used for. This is a great gain for seniors. In the last 3 months, we have increased that by 650 further outlets
Order.
to do with things that seniors...
Order. The question's been answered. Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
What is she doing on behalf of seniors to advocate for an end to the SuperGold Card review described by Mr. Voss on the 18th of February, Mr. Foss on 18th of February, as being completed June 2014? He gave the date back then. And what is she doing about new applications being made, for example, from Paia to Russell Ferry, the Okiato to Opua Ferry, the Kohukohu to Rawani Ferry, or, for example, the Bluff to Stewart Island Ferry, all stopped by the closure of all applications until the moratorium's over?
Honourable Maggie Barry.
Mr. Speaker, the moratorium was put in place in 2010, so the member's somewhat behind the times. The member may be stung by the notion that he's done little to serve his electorate, but let's not cloud the issue. Minister Foss said in this House, and I checked the Hansard because I'm in the habit of checking facts rather than just burbling off the top of my head like that member, but Minister Foss said in this House in February, in response to a question from that member, that there would be, he expected an answer by the end of June this year. That may happen, it may be a little longer. Those were his expectations. We do things thoroughly.
The question has now been answered. Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
In asking the Minister as to what she's doing, is it not a fact that a moratorium exists that prevents new applications for the transport allocations, and that has been extended now by over a year? And if so, can she explain to this House and the New Zealand Herald confused journalist what the facts are, including the one in the Dom yesterday saying that she was particularly ineffective?
Either of those two supplementary questions, Honourable Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to ineffective, I take lessons from the master, and that would be you.
Question. Order. Order. I need to remind all members, particularly to my right, that this is a point of order.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. That's the very sort of interjection that'll have that minister leaving the chamber. I'll hear the point of order.
My point of order is that I'm asking whether or not the moratorium prevents any new applications.
Order. No, the member can resume his seat immediately. He also asked about the effectiveness of the minister, and the minister took the opportunity to respond.
Point of order. No, point of order.
I have just addressed the matter. If the member's raising a fresh point of order,
this is a new matter, sir, and it goes
I'll look forward to it.
It goes to numerous answers of the 4 answers she gave, all attacking me personally, none of which I objected to.
Order.
None of which I objected to.
Order. The member will resume his seat. This member gives as good as he gets. Question number 4, Phil Twyford.